The year is 1790, and outside this modest home in Philadelphia, America is taking its first uncertain steps as a new nation. Inside, Benjamin Franklin, perhaps the most complete human being in history, is dying. But instead of spending his final days in comfort, he's writing. His pen moves across parchment with the same precision that once guided his experiments with lightning and his negotiations with kings. From youth, his mind had been inclined toward the way of improvement, starting with his first business venture at age 12, when he apprenticed to his brother James. Now, at the end of his extraordinary life, he's distilling everything he's learned into letters and memoirs that will outlive him by centuries. These aren't just autobiographical sketches or political memoirs. What Franklin created in that Philadelphia home represents perhaps the most practical philosophical system ever developed by a single human being. His autobiography revolutionized thinking about self-improvement far beyond personal development. His Poor Richard's Almanac contains wisdom that cuts straight to the heart of how to live with purpose and prosperity. His letters and essays form a comprehensive guide to mastering not just success, but life itself. But here's what makes Franklin truly extraordinary. When he looked back on his achievements at age 50, he realized they weren't due to natural talent or fortunate circumstances, but to a systematic approach to improvement that anyone could learn. This moment of insight changed everything. He developed what he called his method of moral perfection, spent decades refining it, and created a philosophy that transcends his era. He became a master printer, scientist, inventor, diplomat, writer, and statesman. He understood that true mastery in one area unlocks mastery in all areas. As he wrote, "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest." This isn't just colonial wisdom. This is a complete operating system for human excellence. If you're enjoying these insights, I'd truly appreciate a quick like or subscribe. It supports this content more than you realize. I'm always fascinated to know where you're tuning in from, so drop a comment with your city and what time it is there. I love watching our global community connect through these timeless ideas. Now, settle in comfortably, maybe adjust your lighting, and let's dive into tonight's exploration together. We're going to discover why Benjamin Franklin's complete philosophy provides the most practical roadmap ever created for building a life of meaning, impact, and fulfillment. What you're about to discover isn't just the story of America's first entrepreneur. You're about to learn a way of thinking and living that's been tested in the crucible of real-world challenges, refined through decades of practical application, and proven effective across centuries. Every principle we'll explore has been forged in the fire of actual experience. Every teaching comes from a man who staked his reputation on these ideas and consistently succeeded. To develop his philosophy, Franklin didn't rely on ancient texts or philosophical traditions. He drew from pure experimentation and practical results. What emerges is a system so practical and profound that it speaks to anyone seeking to excel in any field. Whether you're an entrepreneur, building a business, a professional pursuing advancement, a creative seeking mastery, or simply someone who wants to live with purpose and effectiveness, Franklin's complete philosophy provides the blueprint. Part 1. The foundation of all progress. Progress isn't what most people think it is. When we hear the word, we often imagine dramatic breakthroughs or sudden transformations. But Benjamin Franklin understood something far more fundamental. He declared that little strokes fell great oaks and that consistent small improvements compound into extraordinary results over time. However, his definition of progress extends far beyond mere achievement. Every person who seeks to master their life and contribute something meaningful to the world is walking the path of continuous improvement. Think about your daily existence for a moment. You wake up each morning with countless opportunities to become slightly better than you were yesterday. How do you decide which improvements deserve your attention and which don't? How do you maintain momentum when progress seems slow? How do you stay motivated when results aren't immediately visible? These are the fundamental questions of human development, and how you answer them determines the trajectory of your entire life. Franklin taught that there are various paths in life: the way of commerce and trade, the way of politics and governance, the way of science and discovery, the way of art and creativity. Each person gravitates toward different paths based on their inclinations and circumstances. But here's the crucial insight that separates Franklin's approach from all others. He understood that the path of improvement is the master key that unlocks success in every other domain. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that true mastery requires both systematic thinking and consistent action, both planning and execution, both vision and daily habits. Most people fall into one of two traps. Either they become perpetual planners who analyze endlessly but never implement what they learn, or they become mindless actors who stay busy but never reflect on whether their efforts are effective. Franklin understood that excellence demands the integration of both approaches. You must think like a scientist and act like an entrepreneur. But progress in Franklin's understanding goes even deeper than this. He explained that the way of improvement is the way of nature itself. And when you align with the natural laws that govern growth and development, you'll be able to achieve goals naturally and succeed naturally. This isn't just about personal achievement. This is about working with the fundamental principles that govern all successful endeavors. Consider how a seed grows into a tree. It doesn't struggle against natural laws, but works with them. It sends roots deep before growing tall. It develops strong foundations before expanding its reach. It grows slowly and consistently rather than trying to rush the process. When conditions aren't favorable, it conserves energy and waits for better circumstances. This is systematic thinking at its highest level. Now imagine applying this same principle to career development. Instead of forcing rapid advancement that creates instability, you study the natural progression of your field until you understand its dynamics. You identify where opportunities naturally emerge and position yourself to take advantage of them. You recognize when to push forward aggressively and when to consolidate your gains. You work with human nature rather than against it. This is what Franklin meant by succeeding naturally. The main difference Franklin noted between his approach and other self-improvement methods is that most systems focus only on motivation and willpower, while ignoring systematic methodology. Some personal development approaches concern themselves only with positive thinking and limit their scope to emotional management and attitude adjustment. In modern terms, this is like focusing only on inspiration while ignoring implementation, or perfecting mindset while missing the practical systems that create results. Most people spend their lives optimizing their feelings about success rather than optimizing their systems for creating success. They become incredibly efficient at feeling motivated while remaining ineffective at producing outcomes. They master techniques for maintaining positive attitudes while missing the bigger picture of how real change actually happens. Franklin's approach demands that you constantly zoom out and ask the fundamental questions. What am I really trying to accomplish? Are these actions moving me closer to or further from my ultimate objectives? Am I working on the right priorities at the right time, in the right way? These questions separate systematic thinkers from mere optimists. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Franklin's foundational thinking is his understanding of universality. He taught that mastering the principles of improvement in one area naturally transfers to all other areas. When you understand the core patterns that govern success in any domain, you can apply them everywhere. The principles that made Franklin a successful printer also made him a successful diplomat. Planning, preparation, attention to detail, understanding your audience, clear communication, and reliable execution. The mindset that won him scientific recognition also won him political influence. Careful observation, hypothesis testing, learning from failures, building on what works, and sharing discoveries with others. The discipline that created his business success also created his personal development. Daily habits, systematic tracking, regular evaluation, continuous adjustment, and long-term thinking. This is why studying Franklin's philosophy isn't just about learning historical curiosities, but about developing capabilities that apply to everything you do. Franklin emphasized that improvement is broader than mere skill development, and there's a science above individual techniques. This higher-level thinking is about understanding life itself. It recognizes that every action has consequences that ripple outward through time. Every decision either strengthens or weakens your overall position. Every relationship either adds to or subtracts from your capability to achieve your goals. Every habit either moves you toward or away from the person you want to become. The systematic mindset sees these connections where others see only isolated events. It anticipates second and third-order effects where others react only to immediate circumstances. It builds systems that compound over time, where others chase quick fixes that create new problems. This is the foundation upon which all of Franklin's other teachings rest. Master this foundation, and everything else becomes possible. Miss this foundation, and even the most sophisticated techniques will fail you when it matters most. As Franklin wrote, "By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail." This isn't just about planning with your mind, but building systems with your entire being that create the underlying patterns which govern success and failure in all aspects of life. Part 2. The Virtue Project. Building unshakable character. Character represents everything solid, reliable, and fundamental about who you are. When Franklin developed his famous 13 virtues, he was teaching us how to build a foundation so strong that nothing can shake it. Think about the most successful people you know. What separates them from everyone else isn't luck or talent, but the solidity of their character. They've developed core principles that support everything else they do. They've established ways of thinking and operating that remain consistent regardless of external circumstances. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to build impressive achievements on weak character. They chase advanced success strategies before mastering basic integrity. They focus on outcomes instead of the daily habits that create those outcomes. They want to appear successful rather than becoming genuinely trustworthy. Franklin understood that this approach always leads to eventual collapse. In his Virtue Project, Franklin taught himself to know the smallest details and the biggest patterns, the daily habits and the life principles, as if they were all part of one integrated system. This means developing the ability to see how character traits connect to real-world results. It means understanding how small daily choices relate to major life outcomes and how surface behaviors reflect deeper values. Let me give you a concrete example. Most people approach character development by trying to change everything at once. They make dramatic resolutions and try to transform their entire personality overnight. But Franklin would focus on one virtue at a time, spending months perfecting each one until it became absolutely natural. He understood that lasting character change comes from systematic practice, not emotional inspiration. If your fundamentals are weak, your advanced achievements will always be unstable. This same principle applies to everything in life. If you want to build a successful career, you must first master the character traits of reliability, integrity, diligence, and clear communication. If you want to develop meaningful relationships, you must first master honesty, empathy, patience, and consistency. If you want to achieve anything significant, you must first build the character traits that make success inevitable. Franklin's Virtue Project also teaches us about the importance of systematic self-monitoring. Franklin spent enormous amounts of time tracking his daily behavior, noting his failures and successes, and adjusting his approach based on actual results rather than good intentions. He understood that character development requires complete honesty about your current state. You cannot improve what you don't measure. In modern terms, this means becoming completely objective about your actual behavior rather than your intended behavior. If you're developing punctuality, you need to track exactly when you arrive versus when you plan to arrive. If you're working on communication, you need to monitor how your words actually affect others, rather than how you think they should affect others. Surface-level self-awareness will always be inadequate when facing serious character challenges. But Franklin's Virtue Project goes beyond just behavioral tracking. It teaches us about developing the right mindset and approach to personal development itself. Franklin emphasized that character development requires both systematic effort and patient persistence. But he also understood that effective character work requires proper methods and realistic expectations. Random good intentions aren't the same as systematic character building. Reading about virtues isn't the same as developing them deeply enough to maintain them under pressure. Knowing what's right isn't the same as consistently doing what's right when it's difficult or costly. The character foundation requires what Franklin called honest self-examination. This means looking past your self-image to understand your actual patterns of behavior. It means questioning your excuses and testing your commitments against real results. It means being honest about your current character, rather than pretending to be more developed than you actually are. Most people live in a fog of self-deception because facing their character honestly feels uncomfortable. But you cannot build anything solid on a foundation of self-delusion. Consider how this applies to personal integrity. Most people want to think of themselves as honest, but they refuse to honestly assess the small ways they compromise their integrity daily. They rationalize little deceptions, justify minor betrayals of their word, and excuse character lapses when it's convenient. They set character goals based on who they wish they were, rather than who they actually are. They choose inspiring virtues that sound appealing, rather than addressing the specific character weaknesses that actually limit their effectiveness. This approach guarantees failure because it skips the essential step of building on honest ground. Franklin's Virtue Project teaches us that true strength comes from accepting your current character completely and then building systematically from that foundation. This requires patience because character work is often invisible and unglamorous. It requires discipline because virtue practice can feel tedious compared to pursuing exciting opportunities. It requires humility because you must admit your character flaws and start from wherever you actually are. But it also provides something that no shortcut can ever deliver: unshakable confidence that comes from genuine integrity. When your character is solid, you can adapt to any situation because you understand the principles underlying all ethical decisions. When your virtues are developed, you can handle pressure gracefully because you have a reliable internal compass to guide you. When your integrity is complete rather than partial, you can see opportunities and make connections that remain hidden to people with compromised character. This is what Franklin meant when he said that honesty is the best policy. Franklin's Virtue Project also emphasizes the importance of developing character in the right sequence. Franklin understood that some virtues must be established before others can be effective. You cannot develop genuine humility until you first learn to be honest with yourself. You cannot master temperance until you first developed self-awareness. You cannot transcend self-interest until you first learn to honor your commitments to yourself. Trying to skip steps in this sequence leads to confusion and eventual character collapse. This sequential approach requires enormous patience in a world that promises instant transformation. But Franklin knew that anything worth achieving takes time to build properly. Character isn't something you establish once and then forget about. It requires constant attention and refinement throughout your entire development. Even at the highest levels of success, you must regularly return to basic virtues to ensure they remain sharp and clean. Character supports everything else, so it must be maintained with the greatest care. Part 3. The Art of Useful Knowledge. Knowledge is the most powerful force for human advancement, yet it appears completely abstract and theoretical when poorly applied. Over time, useful knowledge transforms entire civilizations, yet it never fights ignorance directly. Knowledge flows around obstacles, finds practical applications, and eventually reaches its destination no matter what stands in its way. When Franklin wrote about the pursuit of useful knowledge, he was teaching us how to develop the same kind of practical power in our own learning. Most people approach learning like a collector approaching artifacts. They accumulate information directly and hope to impress others with their extensive knowledge. When this approach fails to produce real-world results, they accumulate more information. When that fails, they become frustrated and either give up or exhaust themselves through futile intellectual activity. Franklin understood that this academic approach works only in very limited circumstances. True learning requires the ability to adapt your knowledge to match the nature of each specific challenge. Franklin's revolutionary learning approach was what he called useful knowledge, information that could be immediately applied to improve real conditions. Instead of studying abstract theories like everyone else, Franklin focused on knowledge that could solve actual problems and create tangible value. This gave him multiple advantages in every situation. He could learn quickly because he tested everything immediately. He could adapt to new fields because he understood underlying principles. He could contribute meaningfully because his knowledge was always practical. But the deeper lesson here isn't about information gathering. It's about developing a learning methodology that creates real-world capability rather than just academic credentials. In modern terms, this means building a diverse toolkit of applied knowledge that you can combine as circumstances require. Instead of becoming rigidly specialized in abstract subjects, you develop complementary areas of practical knowledge that enhance each other. Think about the most successful innovators you know. They don't succeed by being the most knowledgeable person in one narrow field. They succeed by being very good at connecting knowledge from several related areas and applying those connections to solve real problems. They can understand technology and human psychology and market dynamics and communication. They can think theoretically and implement practically. They can learn from books and learn from experience. This combination of complementary knowledge areas allows them to adapt to whatever challenges arise. Franklin's approach teaches us that learning requires maintaining perfect balance between acquisition and application. Franklin wrote that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, but knowledge that isn't invested through practical application pays no interest at all. A mind that doesn't create value from its learning doesn't build wealth from its knowledge. This means staying curious and studious while constantly testing what you learn in real situations. Your fundamental learning principles should remain consistent even as your specific knowledge areas evolve. This is the paradox of effective learning. Consider how this applies to professional development. Effective professionals maintain consistent learning habits while adapting their knowledge focus to different market needs. They hold firm to the principles of useful knowledge while remaining flexible about which specific subjects they study. They provide stability through their learning methodology while encouraging innovation in their knowledge application. They can be deep when depth is needed and broad when breadth is more effective. This isn't inconsistency, but adaptive mastery. Franklin's learning approach also teaches us about the importance of connecting knowledge across different domains. Franklin didn't learn about printing, science, politics, and writing as separate subjects. He understood that effective knowledge flows between different areas and creates unexpected insights when properly connected. Knowledge doesn't flow at a constant rate. It accumulates quickly when you're actively learning and slowly when you're mainly applying. It expands rapidly when you discover new principles and consolidates gradually when you master their application. It responds to the intellectual landscape while maintaining its essential direction. This teaches us that effective learning requires matching your learning pace and intensity to the demands of each situation. Most people either learn too fast or too slow for their circumstances. They try to force rapid knowledge acquisition when patient application would be more effective, or they hesitate to learn new things when decisive knowledge expansion is required. They apply the same level of learning intensity to every situation instead of calibrating their effort to match what is actually needed. Learning to sense the appropriate learning rhythm for each situation is one of the most valuable capabilities you can develop. Franklin's approach teaches us that true intellectual power comes from understanding and working with the natural patterns of knowledge rather than trying to force artificial learning schedules. When Franklin encountered a knowledge gap, he didn't try to fill it by reading more books. Instead, he found people who had the knowledge he needed and learned directly from their experience. If one learning method didn't work, he found another. If he couldn't learn through reading, he learned through experimentation. If he couldn't understand something alone, he formed clubs with others who shared his curiosity, but he never abandoned his fundamental commitment to useful knowledge. This combination of strategic persistence and tactical flexibility is what allowed Franklin to master multiple fields, and what allows people to achieve seemingly impossible expertise. Franklin's learning philosophy also teaches us about the importance of maintaining intellectual flow in our daily lives. When learning stops moving, it becomes stagnant and eventually useless. In the same way, when we stop growing, questioning, and discovering, we begin to deteriorate intellectually. Staying in learning flow requires constantly exposing yourself to new challenges, new perspectives, and new applications for what you know. It means being willing to leave comfortable areas of expertise when they no longer serve your growth. It means choosing temporary intellectual discomfort over permanent stagnation. Part 4. The Lightning Rod Principle: Mastering Practical Innovation. When the moment of discovery arrives, everything changes. All your research, all your theories, all your careful preparation suddenly gives way to the raw intensity of direct experimentation. Franklin's scientific method deals with these crucial moments when everything unknown becomes known. Whether you're solving a complex problem, creating something new, facing a technical challenge, or pursuing an important breakthrough, there comes a time when you must step into the unknown and test your ideas. Most people perform well in familiar, theoretical environments. They can analyze perfectly when there are no stakes and no pressure. But when real innovation is required, when time becomes short, when the outcome really matters, many people fall apart. Their carefully studied theories abandon them. Their clear thinking becomes confused. Their confident preparation transforms into anxious hesitation. Franklin understood that this difference between theoretical knowledge and practical innovation is what separates true discoverers from mere scholars. His lightning experiments teach us how to bridge this gap. Franklin's scientific approach focused specifically on practical experimentation and the art of direct testing. Franklin explained that the way to see by faith is to shut the eye of reason, but he also understood that reason without testing is just sophisticated speculation. When breakthrough discoveries are needed, being even slightly wrong in your assumptions can mean the difference between success and dangerous failure. Think about the precision required in crucial business innovation. There's a moment when market conditions are ready for a new solution. And if you miss that moment, the opportunity may never return. There's a moment to test bold ideas and a moment to refine proven concepts. There's a moment to invest resources and a moment to preserve them. Reading these moments correctly requires years of experience combined with intense attention to current conditions. You cannot rely on predetermined formulas when every innovation challenge is unique and constantly evolving. Franklin's experiments teach us that effective innovation under uncertainty requires a specific type of mental state. Franklin wrote that in innovation and in everyday life, you should be bold, though careful. Meet the unknown without recklessness, yet not fearfully. Your spirit curious, yet grounded. Even when your spirit is eager, don't let your methods become careless. And when your methods are systematic, don't let your spirit become timid. This describes a state of careful boldness that allows maximum effectiveness under uncertainty. You're completely alert and ready to experiment instantly, but you're not reckless or ungrounded. Most people under innovation pressure become either too cautious or too wild. When they're too cautious, they cannot adapt quickly to unexpected discoveries. Their experiments become rigid, and their thinking becomes narrow. When they're too wild, they cannot learn systematically from their results. Their efforts become sloppy, and their focus becomes scattered. Franklin's lightning experiments teach us how to find the optimal middle ground, where we can be both systematic and creative, both grounded and adventurous. One of the most important lessons of Franklin's scientific approach is about reading the rhythm of discovery. Every innovation process, whether scientific, technical, or creative, has its own natural rhythm. There are moments when you should pursue promising leads, and moments when you should step back and analyze your results. There are times for bold experimentation and times for careful refinement. Learning to feel this rhythm and align your efforts with it gives you an enormous advantage over innovators who try to force their own timeline on every discovery process. This is what Franklin meant by conducting experiments naturally and discovering naturally. Franklin's approach also teaches us about the importance of maintaining practical perspective, even in the excitement of discovery. When breakthrough possibilities increase, most people lose sight of their larger objectives and become focused only on the immediate thrill of exploration. They make short-term discoveries that create long-term problems. They win experimental victories that lead to practical defeats. Franklin understood that true innovation requires keeping both immediate experiments and ultimate applications in mind simultaneously. You must be fully present to what you're discovering right now, while never losing sight of how you plan to use those discoveries. This dual awareness is incredibly difficult to maintain under the excitement of innovation. It requires extensive practice and gradually increasing levels of complexity. You cannot develop this capability by theorizing only in comfortable conditions. You must deliberately expose yourself to higher and higher levels of uncertainty until you can maintain clarity and effectiveness regardless of how unknown the territory becomes. This is why Franklin conducted so many actual experiments rather than just thinking about scientific problems. He understood that real innovation cannot be simulated, only experienced. Franklin's scientific method teaches us that effective innovation requires complete commitment without attachment to predetermined outcomes. When you step into unknown territory, you must give everything you have to the exploration at hand. Holding back or hedging your experiments virtually guarantees failure in high-stakes innovation. But paradoxically, you must also remain emotionally detached from specific results. If you become too invested in having your hypothesis proven correct, you will make desperate interpretations that undermine your objectivity. This balance between total experimental commitment and emotional detachment is one of the most challenging aspects of innovation performance. Consider how this applies to creative work under deadlines. You must commit completely to producing the most innovative solution possible within the time constraints. You cannot hold back effort or inspiration, but you also cannot become so attached to your first idea that you freeze up or miss better alternatives. You must give everything you have while accepting that the result will be whatever emerges from honest experimentation given the circumstances. This allows you to innovate at your peak while maintaining the flexibility to adapt as discoveries change your understanding. Franklin's lightning rod principle also teaches us about the importance of decisive action once you've committed to testing an idea. Franklin emphasized that hesitation in the moment of experimentation is usually fatal to discovery. Once you've decided to test something, you must test it completely and immediately. Partial experiments lead to partial results and often create more confusion than conducting no experiment at all. This doesn't mean experimenting recklessly or without consideration. It means that once your consideration is complete, you must transition immediately to total experimental commitment. Franklin's scientific approach teaches us that mastery of innovation comes from transforming uncertainty into opportunity. Instead of seeing unknown challenges as threats to be avoided, innovators see them as chances to make discoveries and push their understanding to new levels. They welcome uncertainty because they know it reveals aspects of reality that remain hidden in familiar conditions. This shift in perspective from threat to opportunity changes everything about how you prepare for and engage with innovation challenges. Part 5. The Almanac Wisdom. Learning from all experience. Pride is the enemy of wisdom. The moment you believe you figured out how life works, you stop learning and start stagnating. When Franklin compiled Poor Richard's Almanac, he was teaching us something that goes against human nature. Instead of focusing only on your own experiences, your own insights, your own discoveries, you must actively study everyone else's experience. Not to copy other people's approaches, but to understand them so deeply that you can extract the universal principles that apply to all human situations. This understanding makes your own wisdom more complete and helps you avoid the blindness that comes from limited experience. Poor Richard's Almanac wasn't concerned with Franklin's personal philosophy, but with the accumulated wisdom of all human experience. By almanac, he meant traditional sayings, contemporary insights, and folk wisdom. He understood that it's difficult to understand life if you only learn from your own experience. This principle applies far beyond personal development. Whether you're building a business, developing relationships, or trying to understand any complex aspect of life, you cannot achieve true wisdom without studying alternative perspectives and different approaches. Your own way of seeing things always seems natural and correct to you, but it's only one viewpoint among many possible viewpoints. Most people study other people's experiences only to find ways to judge or dismiss them. They look for mistakes they can avoid or successes they can envy. But Franklin approached the study of all human experience with a much deeper purpose. He wanted to understand the principles underlying different life strategies, the assumptions driving various approaches, and the context in which alternative methods might be superior to his own. This kind of learning requires intellectual humility and genuine curiosity rather than competitive comparison. It means being willing to admit that others might understand something you don't. Consider how this applies to life strategy. Most people study successful individuals to find ways to copy their tactics or judge their methods. They focus on surface behaviors, external circumstances, and obvious factors. But the wisest people study successful and unsuccessful experiences to understand different approaches to creating value and meaning. They ask questions like, what human needs are they addressing that I might be missing? What assumptions are they making about life that might be more accurate than mine? What capabilities have they developed that I should consider developing? This deeper level of wisdom gathering leads to insight rather than just imitation. Franklin's Almanac approach teaches us that studying all experience helps you understand the context and limitations of your own methods. Every approach works well in some situations and poorly in others. When you only know one way of doing things, you tend to apply that approach everywhere, even when it's not appropriate. When you understand multiple approaches, you can choose the most effective method for each specific situation. This flexibility is one of the key advantages of broad wisdom over narrow experience. You become like a craftsman with a full toolbox rather than someone who only owns one tool. But studying all human experience also reveals something else that's equally important. It shows you the fundamental principles that underlie all effective living. When you study enough different approaches to the same life challenges, you begin to see patterns. You notice that successful approaches, despite their surface differences, often share deeper similarities. They address the same underlying human needs, just in different ways. This recognition of underlying patterns allows you to extract principles that can be applied to entirely new situations. Franklin's Almanac wisdom teaches us about the danger of becoming too attached to any particular method or cultural approach. Franklin observed that to all ways there are side paths. If you follow a culture daily and your spirit diverges, you may think you're following a good way, but objectively, it's not the true way. If you're following the true way and diverge a little, this will later become a large divergence. This describes how even good cultural practices can become corrupted over time if they're followed blindly rather than understood deeply. Tradition without understanding leads to stagnation and eventual irrelevance. Think about how this applies to life planning. Many people learn a set of life strategies early in their development and then stop updating their approach. They become increasingly confident in their established methods while the world around them continues to evolve. Eventually, their strategies become obsolete, but they don't realize it because they've stopped paying attention to how others approach the same challenges. They mistake familiarity with their particular methods for mastery of life itself. Franklin's Almanac approach teaches us that true wisdom requires constantly updating your understanding by studying how others approach the same human challenges. Franklin's Almanac also teaches us about the importance of understanding not just what other approaches do, but why they do it. Surface-level copying of strategies rarely works, because strategies are expressions of deeper values and assumptions. If you copy the strategy without understanding the principle, you'll likely apply it incorrectly or inappropriately. But if you understand the principle, you can develop your own expressions of that principle that fit your specific situation and capabilities. This is the difference between imitation and adaptation. Innovation comes from understanding principles well enough to apply them in new ways. Consider how this applies to relationship development. Many people try to copy the specific behaviors of individuals who have good relationships. They notice that certain people use particular communication styles, make certain types of decisions, or structure their relationships in certain ways. But when they try to copy these surface behaviors, the results are usually disappointing. This is because those specific behaviors were expressions of deeper principles applied to specific personalities and contexts. Effective relationship development requires understanding the principles underlying good relationships, not just copying the techniques of particular people. Franklin's Almanac Wisdom teaches us that studying all experience should make you more confident in your own approach, not less. When you understand why you do things the way you do them, and when you've consciously chosen your methods after considering alternatives, your commitment becomes much stronger. You're no longer following your approach out of habit or ignorance, but out of genuine understanding and conscious choice. This kind of informed commitment is much more flexible and resilient than blind adherence to one way of doing things. The Almanac approach also warns us about the common tendency to judge other approaches by the standards of your own approach. This virtually guarantees that you'll misunderstand them. Every approach has its own internal logic and its own criteria for success. To understand an approach accurately, you must temporarily adopt its perspective and evaluate it by its own standards. Only then can you make meaningful comparisons and extract useful insights. This requires intellectual empathy and the ability to think from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Part 6. The Way of Wealth. Understanding true prosperity. There comes a moment in every person's journey when all the conventional advice about money falls away. All the budgeting, all the investing tips, all the careful financial planning becomes secondary to something much deeper. When Franklin wrote The Way to Wealth, he was pointing toward the ultimate source of all genuine prosperity, a state where you no longer need to worry about money because you have mastered the principles that create wealth naturally. This isn't mystical thinking, but a very practical reality that every truly wealthy person eventually discovers. Most people misunderstand what wealth means. They imagine it as some kind of magical accumulation of money that has nothing to do with personal character or systematic thinking. But Franklin was intensely practical. Everything he taught was tested in real business situations. When he wrote about wealth, he was describing a very real relationship with money that dramatically enhances effectiveness in any domain. It's the state where scarcity becomes abundance, where financial techniques become natural expression, and where money thinking becomes intuitive wisdom. Wealth is what happens when you've internalized economic principles so completely that you no longer need to think about applying them. Your financial decisions become spontaneous and perfectly appropriate to each situation. You act from a deeper understanding that sees opportunities and patterns that conscious calculation cannot process quickly enough. This is why wealthy people often cannot explain exactly how they make money. They've transcended the level of conscious technique and entered the realm of embodied financial wisdom. Their knowledge has become part of who they are rather than something they use. Think about how a master entrepreneur operates. They're not consciously thinking about profit margins, cash flow, or business theory. All of that knowledge is still there, but it's become so deeply integrated that it operates automatically. Their conscious attention is free to focus on higher-level concerns like value creation, market evolution, and strategic positioning. They can take business risks and explore new territories because their foundation is so solid that they don't need to worry about basic financial competence. This is what the wealth state looks like in practical application. Wealth represents the culmination of all financial learning. Budgeting provides the solid foundation of money management and financial discipline. Investment teaches adaptability and compound thinking. Entrepreneurship develops the ability to create value under uncertainty. Business education provides broad perspective and understanding of how different economic approaches work. Wealth is where all of these elements integrate into seamless, effortless prosperity. But you cannot skip to wealth. You must progress through each stage completely before the next becomes possible. Franklin wrote that, "In wealth, there is virtue and no poverty. Wisdom has abundance. Principle has prosperity. The way has wealth. Spirit is generosity." This describes a state where your actions are automatically aligned with what creates value and prosperity. You no longer need to struggle with internal conflicts between what you want financially and what you should do economically. Your desires and your financial principles have become integrated. Your personal interests and wealth creation have become aligned. This integration eliminates the internal friction that wastes so much energy for most people. All your energy becomes available for productive activity. Wealth also represents freedom from the need for external financial validation. When you operate from wealth consciousness, your sense of security and direction comes from within, rather than from others' opinions about your financial status or society's expectations about how much money you should have. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant about money or ignoring financial feedback. It means having such a clear internal economic compass that external financial influences inform your decisions without controlling them. You can remain open to learning about money while maintaining your financial autonomy. But perhaps the most important aspect of wealth consciousness is what Franklin called knowing that which has no price by knowing things that have price. This refers to the ability to perceive value and opportunities that aren't yet reflected in market prices. When you understand economic principles deeply enough, you can see how they might apply in situations where others haven't recognized the potential. You can anticipate market developments before they become obvious to others. You can sense opportunities and create value that exist only as possibilities rather than actualities. This kind of perception gives you an enormous advantage in any economic or creative endeavor. Consider how this applies to business development. Successful entrepreneurs often seem to have an uncanny ability to spot opportunities that others miss. They can see market needs before those needs become obvious. They can anticipate economic trends before they reach mainstream awareness. They can sense when timing is right for ideas that seem premature just months earlier. This is not luck or mystical intuition, but the result of understanding economic principles so deeply that they can extrapolate from existing patterns to future possibilities. The wealth state also enables what Franklin called natural value creation. This means responding to market opportunities with perfect timing and appropriate resources without conscious calculation. Your actions arise spontaneously from your deep understanding of economic reality, rather than from predetermined business plans or reactive desperation. This allows you to be simultaneously more responsive and more consistent than people who rely heavily on conscious financial planning. You can adapt instantly to changing market circumstances while remaining true to your core economic principles. This is the ultimate goal of all wealth development. But how do you develop wealth consciousness? It cannot be forced or rushed. It emerges naturally from years of dedicated business practice, combined with constant reflection and refinement. You must master each financial level completely before the next becomes accessible. You must be willing to let go of attachment to money-making techniques and methods that served you well at earlier stages, but now limit your development. Most importantly, you must maintain what Franklin called beginner's mind, even as your financial expertise deepens. Wealth consciousness requires what Franklin called no attachment to specific financial outcomes. This doesn't mean having no financial goals or standards. It means not being dependent on specific amounts of money or particular forms of wealth. You can work toward financial goals without being emotionally dependent on achieving them in exactly the way you originally envisioned. You can use money-making techniques without being limited by them. You can hold strong financial values without being rigid about how they're expressed. This flexibility allows you to respond optimally to whatever economic opportunities actually arise, rather than trying to force reality to match your financial preconceptions. This is true financial freedom, and it's the ultimate fruit of all genuine wealth education. Part 7. The Moral Perfection Method. Franklin's Final Wisdom. At age 20, Benjamin Franklin made a decision that would define the rest of his life. His business was growing, his reputation was spreading, but he realized something was missing. He could see his potential, but he could also see the character flaws that were holding him back. His impatience, his pride, his tendency to argue unnecessarily. These weren't just personality quirks. They were obstacles to becoming the person he wanted to be. So Franklin did something remarkable. He created a systematic method for moral improvement that he would follow for the rest of his life. The Moral Perfection Method wasn't intended for publication or to impress others. It was his private attempt to become genuinely excellent as a human being. Unlike his public writings, which focused on practical success, this method dealt with something much more fundamental: how to transform your character systematically. These 13 virtues weren't random moral principles, but elements of an integrated system for human development. Together, they address the most common character flaws that prevent people from living up to their potential. They provided practical solutions to universal human challenges like managing desires, controlling reactions, maintaining focus, and treating others well. But Franklin discovered something remarkable about systematic character development. When you commit to improving yourself methodically, rather than just hoping to be better, you're forced to develop internal resources that are actually more reliable and powerful than natural talent or favorable circumstances. When you cannot rely on mood or motivation for good behavior, you must develop genuine discipline and character. When you cannot depend on others for validation, you must learn to trust your own moral compass. When you cannot follow cultural trends for guidance, you must learn to navigate by principles rather than popularity. The path of moral perfection, though demanding, leads to a kind of integrity and authenticity that most people never experience. The Moral Perfection Method isn't a work of philosophy in the academic sense. Every virtue in it was tested in the crucible of real experience. Franklin didn't develop these principles by thinking about them in comfort and safety. He developed them by living them through decades of business challenges, political conflicts, and personal struggles. These virtues kept him effective when success was not guaranteed. They kept him grounded when fame might have driven him to arrogance. They kept him growing when stagnation would have been easier. This practical foundation gives the method a weight and authority that purely theoretical approaches can never achieve. What makes the moral perfection method particularly relevant today is that modern life increasingly demands the kind of character strength that external institutions use to provide. Traditional sources of moral guidance like religion, community, and family provide less structure than they did in previous generations. Ethical standards are less clear, and moral leadership is less available. People are expected to create their own character development without clear models or support systems. In many ways, we are all responsible for our own moral education now. Forced to navigate a complex world with only our own character as our guide. Franklin's hard-earned wisdom about how to build that character systematically has never been more valuable. But the path of moral perfection doesn't mean literal moral superiority. Franklin had meaningful relationships and made significant contributions throughout his life. What it means is taking complete responsibility for your own character development. It means not depending on others to make you behave well or provide you with moral motivation. It means being able to do the right thing when necessary while remaining open to learning when appropriate. It means developing such inner strength and clarity that you can contribute to others from a position of moral abundance rather than moral neediness. Franklin's 13 virtues covered every aspect of how to live this way. They addressed how to relate to pleasure and discipline, success and failure, others and yourself. They taught how to maintain your moral center when everything around you is changing. They showed how to act with integrity, even when no one is watching or rewarding you. They provided a complete operating system for character development that doesn't depend on external moral enforcement or social approval. But they also required something that most people are unwilling to give. Living by these principles demanded brutal honesty about your actual behavior versus your intended behavior. It required accepting responsibility for your character choices and their consequences without blaming others or making excuses. It demanded developing self-control and moral discipline without external enforcement. It required finding meaning and motivation within your own character development rather than seeking them from others. Most people prefer to remain dependent on external moral structures, even when those structures are inconsistent or unreliable, because character development requires too much effort and responsibility. The path of moral perfection isn't for everyone, but it's available to anyone willing to pay its price. Each of the 13 virtues builds on the others to create a comprehensive approach to character development. They're not just random pieces of moral advice, but elements of an integrated system. Together, they address the most common sources of character weakness and moral inconsistency that prevent people from living up to their potential. They provide practical solutions to universal human challenges like managing impulses, handling criticism, maintaining motivation over long periods, and treating others with consistent respect. They show how to transform character obstacles into opportunities and moral setbacks into stepping stones. They teach how to extract value from every experience, even morally challenging ones. But perhaps most importantly, the moral perfection method teaches how to live without moral regret. When you follow these principles consistently, you know that you're doing your best with whatever character challenges you face. You're not wasting energy on behaviors that don't serve your highest values. You're not making decisions based on impulse, pride, or selfishness, that you'll later wish you could undo. You're building a character that reflects your deepest values and highest aspirations. This creates a sense of moral peace and satisfaction that no external achievement can provide. Part 8. The first virtue: temperance and self-mastery. Temperance. Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. This first virtue cuts through centuries of self-help advice about willpower and self-control with a simple, practical principle. This isn't about depriving yourself or following extreme restrictions. This is the foundation of all effective action and the beginning of real self-mastery. Until you can regulate your most basic appetites without being controlled by them, you cannot master anything else effectively. Most human ineffectiveness comes not from lack of knowledge or opportunity, but from lack of self-regulation. We waste enormous amounts of energy being controlled by impulses instead of focusing that energy on things that actually matter. Think about how much mental energy you spend managing your relationship with food, drink, entertainment, comfort, or other immediate pleasures. Craving things you shouldn't have. Feeling guilty about things you've consumed. Planning elaborate strategies to control appetites that seem to control you. Imagining how much better everything would be if only you had perfect self-control. All of this mental activity is largely unnecessary. The past consumption is completely finished and unchangeable. No amount of guilt or regret will alter it by even the smallest degree. But this internal struggle with basic appetites drains energy that could be used to create a better future. The same principle applies to your current relationship with immediate gratification. You may not like your tendency to overeat, overdrink, or overindulge in any immediate pleasure, but this is the current state you must work with right now. Spending energy fighting your appetites or fantasizing about perfect self-control prevents you from developing the systematic approach that actually creates lasting change. Temperance doesn't mean you have to eliminate all pleasures. It means you stop wasting energy in internal battles with your appetites and start using that energy to develop reliable self-regulation. Franklin learned this lesson through careful self-observation. As a young man, he noticed that overindulgence in food or drink consistently reduced his mental clarity and physical energy. He could have spent his time feeling guilty about this or making dramatic resolutions to change everything immediately. Instead, he accepted his current level of self-control completely and focused all his energy on developing better regulation within that reality. This acceptance allowed him to extract maximum learning from every experience with appetite and self-control. It freed him from the emotional turmoil that consumes people who cannot accept their current relationship with immediate gratification. But temperance is much harder than it sounds. Your mind has a powerful tendency to create justifications for immediate gratification rather than dealing with the discomfort of delayed satisfaction. You develop expectations about when you deserve pleasure, how much you should be able to enjoy, or what you need to feel satisfied. When reality doesn't provide these expected pleasures, you experience frustration, deprivation, or resentment. These emotions feel justified because your expectations seem reasonable. But the problem isn't that your expectations are unreasonable. The problem is that appetites don't care about your expectations. Appetites operate according to their own biological and psychological laws, not according to your preferences about how they should work. Consider how this applies to professional productivity. You may have very clear ideas about how much energy you should have, how focused you should feel, or how motivated you should be. You may believe that if you eat well and rest adequately, you should have consistent high performance. These expectations aren't unreasonable, but they're not guarantees. Your energy levels have their own fluctuations, limitations, and patterns that influence your capability. When you base your productivity on having perfect self-regulation, you give your appetites control over your professional effectiveness. Temperance means recognizing that appetites will fluctuate according to their own nature and circumstances, not according to your preferences about how they should behave. This doesn't mean becoming passive about self-regulation or giving up on improving your relationship with immediate gratification. It means working with your appetites as they actually are, rather than as you wish they were. When you accept someone's current level of self-control, you can help them develop better regulation more effectively. When you accept their appetites, you can find ways to work with those appetites or develop alternatives. When you accept their current relationship with pleasure, you can help them find more sustainable approaches to enjoyment. This kind of acceptance actually makes you more effective at developing self-mastery, not less, because you're dealing with reality rather than fighting it. The same principle applies to accepting your own appetites. You may not like certain aspects of your relationship with food, comfort, or immediate pleasure, but these are the current patterns you have to work with. Wishing you had different appetites will not change your appetites. Only accepting what your current self-regulation actually is and working systematically to develop what you want it to become will create actual change. Self-acceptance around temperance isn't self-indulgence or making excuses for poor self-control. It's honest assessment that allows effective development. You cannot improve what you cannot honestly acknowledge. Temperance also means recognizing that self-regulation develops gradually and happens in stages. You cannot transform your relationship with all immediate pleasures overnight or skip steps in developing self-control. You cannot force appetite regulation to happen faster than its natural development timeline. Accepting the pace of real temperance prevents you from becoming frustrated and giving up when progress seems slow. It allows you to maintain consistent effort over long periods because you're not constantly disappointed by unrealistic expectations about how quickly self-mastery should develop. This patience with the development process is one of the most valuable aspects of temperance. But perhaps the most important aspect of temperance is that it frees you from the need to control pleasures that are beyond your immediate control. You cannot control how appealing certain foods will be, how relaxing certain drinks will feel, or how entertaining certain activities will seem. You can only control your own choices about how to respond to those appeals. When you fully accept this limitation, you stop wasting energy on futile attempts to eliminate temptation. All that energy becomes available for developing the self-regulation skills you actually can control. This shift in focus is transformative because it moves you from a position of fighting your appetites to a position of managing your responses. Temperance isn't a one-time achievement, but a daily practice. Every day brings new circumstances that challenge your ability to regulate yourself effectively. Every day offers new opportunities to practice working with your appetites rather than being controlled by them. The more you practice temperance, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, It becomes your default response to any immediate gratification situation. This creates a foundation of self-mastery and practical effectiveness that no external circumstances can shake. Part 9. The second virtue: silence and strategic communication. Silence. Speak not, but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. This second virtue strikes at the heart of what undermines most people's influence and effectiveness. We live in a world of constant communication. Social media that rewards attention-seeking rather than value creation. Meetings that prioritize talking over thinking. Conversations that focus on entertainment rather than meaningful exchange. The modern world encourages us to fill every silence with words, even when those words add no value and often create confusion or conflict. Franklin understood something that our culture has forgotten. True influence comes not from talking as much as possible, but from speaking only when your words can create genuine value. Silence is a tool for gathering information, processing insights, and choosing the most effective moments for communication. When you organize your communication around adding value rather than getting attention, you become someone others actually want to listen to. When you organize your speech around strategic impact rather than emotional release, your words carry weight and create results. But this kind of purposeful communication is deeper and more demanding than anything you can achieve through constant talking. Think about the difference between someone who talks constantly and someone who speaks strategically. The constant talker provides immediate social stimulation, but rarely says anything memorable or useful. The strategic speaker may say less, but when they do speak, people pay attention because they know the words will be worth hearing. The same principle applies to every domain of communication. The silence of avoiding unnecessary arguments is immediate but temporary. The influence of speaking only when you can add value is deeper and more lasting. But avoiding trifling conversation doesn't mean becoming antisocial or joyless. Franklin enjoyed wit, storytelling, and social connection throughout his life. The key is that he didn't use conversation primarily for emotional gratification or social validation. He found value in communication that also served learning, relationship building, or mutual benefit. His conversations improved minds and strengthened connections. His words helped clarify insights and solve problems. This is communication in service of purpose rather than purpose in service of communication. The problem with making talking your primary form of social engagement is that it creates a downward spiral. The more you focus on having something to say, the less you focus on having something worth saying. What used to require thought becomes automatic reaction. What used to be meaningful becomes routine chatter. You need more conversation, more social stimulation, greater verbal cleverness to achieve the same level of satisfaction. This leads to communication addiction, whether to social media, meetings, or constant social interaction. Eventually, you lose the ability to find satisfaction in quiet reflection or meaningful work. You become dependent on external conversation to feel engaged with life. Strategic silence, on the other hand, creates an upward spiral. The more you develop the discipline to speak only when you can add value, the more valuable your communication becomes. The more you contribute through your words, the more others seek your input. The more carefully you choose when to speak, the more impact your words have when you do speak. This kind of influence actually increases over time, rather than diminishing. It makes you more respected rather than more ignored. It connects you to meaningful conversations rather than trapping you in superficial chatter. But developing strategic communication requires patience and self-discipline. Meaningful influence takes time to develop. You must be willing to remain quiet for extended periods while you gather information, process insights, and wait for moments when your words can make a real difference. You must trust that consistent value-focused communication will eventually create more influence than constant attention-seeking. This requires a completely different mindset than social validation seeking, which provides immediate feedback. You must learn to find satisfaction in the quality of your communication rather than depending on the quantity of responses for motivation. Consider how this applies to professional development. Building genuine expertise requires thousands of hours of focused work and study. Most of this development happens in private. It involves reading, thinking, experimenting, and practicing, activities that don't generate immediate social feedback. If you approach professional growth looking for constant conversation and validation, you'll never develop the deep expertise that makes your communication truly valuable. But if you can find purpose in the development process itself, if you can appreciate the gradual improvement that comes from focused work, you can sustain effort long enough to achieve real competence. And competence creates a level of communicative influence that no amount of superficial talking can match. The third aspect of silence involves knowing when not to speak, even when you have something valuable to say. Sometimes the timing isn't right for your input. Sometimes others need space to develop their own insights. Sometimes adding your voice would prevent necessary learning or problem-solving by others. Strategic silence includes the wisdom to withhold valuable communication when sharing it wouldn't serve the larger purpose. This is perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of communication development. It requires understanding not just what to say and how to say it, but when saying it will be most helpful. Franklin understood that words provide valuable information, but they should enhance rather than replace thinking and problem-solving by others. When you're angry, you want to express that anger. When you're excited, you want to share that excitement. When you're worried, you want to voice those concerns. These emotional reactions provide important information about your internal state, but they shouldn't automatically determine your communication choices. The key is to acknowledge your impulse to speak while making communication decisions based on deeper principles and longer-term considerations. This requires developing what Franklin called settled judgment, a calm center that remains stable regardless of external circumstances or internal emotional weather. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. It means developing the capacity to experience emotions fully while maintaining your ability to choose your communication strategically. This kind of communication mastery is essential for anyone who wants to achieve significant influence. Without it, you'll be constantly undermining your effectiveness by speaking at the wrong times or in the wrong ways. Part 10. The third virtue: order and systematic living order. Let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. This third virtue contains perhaps the most practical shift in approach that any human being can make. Most people live in a constant state of mild chaos. They can't find things when they need them. They forget important commitments and deadlines. They switch randomly between different projects without completing any of them effectively. They treat organization as something that happens automatically rather than something that requires systematic attention. This disorganized approach isn't just inconvenient, it's a massive drain on mental energy and effectiveness. When Franklin says, "Let all your things have their places," he doesn't mean rigid perfectionism or obsessive organizing. He means creating systems that reduce the mental effort required for routine activities. Your mind is your most valuable resource, and every moment you spend looking for misplaced items or trying to remember what you're supposed to be doing is a moment not available for creative thinking, problem solving, or meaningful work. Most people underestimate how much disorganization costs them. They think of organization as a luxury for people who have extra time and energy. But Franklin understood that organization is what creates extra time and energy. When everything has a designated place, you don't waste mental effort deciding where to put things or searching for them later. When each part of your business has its designated time, you don't waste decision-making energy figuring out what to do next or switching between different types of activities. Organization isn't the result of having your life together. It's what allows you to get your life together. Consider how this applies to physical possessions. Every item you own either has a designated place or it contributes to mental clutter. When you need something and don't know where to find it, you experience a small stress response. When you finish using something and don't know where to put it, you make a series of small decisions about where it should go. These individual moments seem trivial, but they accumulate into significant mental drain over the course of a day, week, or year. People who seem naturally calm and focused often have simply eliminated these micro-stresses through systematic organization. But order goes much deeper than physical organization. It extends to how you structure your time, your commitments, your relationships, and your thinking. When each part of your business has its time, you're not constantly making decisions about priorities. You've already decided when you do certain types of work, when you handle administrative tasks, when you focus on relationships, and when you pursue personal development. This pre-decision eliminates the decision fatigue that exhausts most people by mid-afternoon. It also allows you to bring full attention to whatever you're doing, because you're not simultaneously thinking about all the other things you should be doing. The mental space freed up by systematic organization becomes available for higher-level thinking, creative problem-solving, and strategic planning. This is why organized people often seem smarter and more capable than disorganized people with similar raw intelligence. They're not necessarily more intelligent. They're just able to use more of their intelligence effectively because they're not wasting it on organizational decisions. Franklin's approach to order was based on understanding the true cost of disorganization. Every system you don't create, every routine you don't establish, every organizational decision you don't make in advance becomes a recurring tax on your mental energy. You pay this tax every time you can't find something, every time you forget something important, every time you have to decide what to do next, and every time you switch inefficiently between different types of activities. Most people pay this tax willingly because creating order requires upfront effort. It takes time to establish organizational systems. It takes discipline to maintain them. It takes patience to develop organizational habits. But the long-term return on this investment is enormous because organization compounds over time. The more organized you become, the more mental energy you have available for becoming even more organized. The clearer your systems become, the easier it is to maintain and improve them. The better your organizational habits become, the less effort organization requires. Eventually, systematic living becomes natural and automatic, freeing up massive amounts of mental resources for creative and strategic thinking. But developing order requires a different approach than most people take. You cannot organize everything at once or skip the process of developing organizational habits gradually. You must start with one area of your life and systematize it completely before moving to the next area. Franklin focused on one organizational challenge at a time, spending weeks or months developing reliable systems before addressing new areas of disorder. This sequential approach requires patience in a world that promises instant organization. But Franklin knew that anything worth systematizing takes time to establish properly. Order isn't something you create once and then maintain automatically. It requires constant attention and refinement throughout your development. Systems that work well at one stage of your life may become inadequate as your responsibilities and opportunities expand. Organizational approaches that served you in simple situations may become limiting when you face complex challenges. The key is to regularly evaluate and update your organizational systems rather than letting them become rigid or outdated. But perhaps the most important aspect of order is that it creates space for spontaneity and creativity rather than eliminating them. When your routine responsibilities are handled systematically, you have more freedom to respond to unexpected opportunities. When your basic organizational needs are met automatically, you can focus creative energy on novel challenges. When your systems are reliable, you can trust them to handle predictable aspects of your life while you explore unpredictable possibilities. This is the paradox of systematic living. Structure creates freedom rather than constraint. People who resist organization often fear that it will make their lives rigid or boring. But the opposite is true. Disorganization forces you to spend most of your time managing chaos rather than pursuing interesting opportunities. Organization handles the routine aspects of life efficiently, so you can focus on the unique and meaningful aspects. Order creates the foundation that makes everything else possible. Master this foundation, and creativity, productivity, and effectiveness all become much more accessible. Miss this foundation, and even the most sophisticated strategies will be undermined by basic organizational inefficiency. Part 11. The complete integration, all virtues. Working together. Resolution. Resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. Industry. Lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. Frugality. Make no expense, but to do good to others or yourself. Waste nothing. These fourth, fifth, and sixth virtues create the operational foundation that makes all other character development possible. Most people develop character in isolation, working on one trait at a time without understanding how different virtues enhance each other. But Franklin understood that genuine character development requires systematic integration of complementary qualities. Resolution provides the decision-making foundation. Industry provides the execution engine. Frugality provides the resource management system. Together, they create a capability for sustained effective action that none could achieve separately. Resolution is perhaps the most misunderstood virtue, because people confuse it with willpower or determination. But Franklin's concept of resolution is much more sophisticated. It's about making clear commitments based on careful consideration, and then honoring those commitments regardless of changing emotions or circumstances. Most people make decisions based on how they feel in the moment, then wonder why their behavior is inconsistent and their results are unreliable. They resolve to exercise when they feel motivated, then abandon the resolution when motivation fades. They commit to projects when they feel enthusiastic, then quit when enthusiasm diminishes. They promise themselves they'll change when they feel guilty, then forget the promise when the guilt passes. This emotional approach to decision-making creates a life of constant starts and stops, broken commitments, and accumulated regret. Franklin's approach was completely different. He made resolutions based on rational evaluation of what would serve his long-term development, then honored those resolutions regardless of temporary emotional states. This created a reliability and consistency that emotional decision-making can never achieve. When you separate decision-making from execution, you can make better decisions because you're not distracted by concerns about whether you'll feel like following through. You can also execute more effectively because you're not constantly redeciding whether your current commitment is still valid. But resolution without industry is just sophisticated planning that never gets implemented. Industry means maintaining consistent, productive activity, regardless of external circumstances or internal resistance. Most people work hard when they feel like it and slack off when they don't. They're productive when conditions are favorable and ineffective when conditions are challenging. They focus intensely on projects that excite them and neglect projects that seem boring or difficult. This inconsistent approach produces inconsistent results and prevents the compound benefits that come from sustained effort over time. Franklin understood that significant achievements require sustained industry over months and years. You cannot accomplish anything important by working intensely for short periods, then taking long breaks. You cannot build expertise by focusing only when you feel motivated. You cannot create valuable relationships by being attentive only when it's convenient. Meaningful results require the ability to maintain productive effort regardless of fluctuating energy, interest, or external support. Industry also means eliminating activities that waste time without providing value. Most people are busy but not productive. They fill their time with activities that feel like work but don't actually move them toward their goals. They attend meetings that accomplish nothing, pursue projects that lead nowhere, and engage in activities that provide temporary satisfaction but long-term regret. Industry requires the discipline to distinguish between being busy and being effective. It means saying no to activities that seem urgent but aren't important. It means focusing on the small number of activities that actually create the results you want, rather than trying to do everything that seems like it might be helpful. But industry without frugality leads to waste and eventual resource exhaustion. Frugality means managing your time, energy, money, and attention as finite resources that must be allocated strategically. Most people waste enormous amounts of resources on things that provide little or no value. They spend money on purchases that don't improve their lives. They spend time on activities that don't serve their goals. They spend energy on conflicts that don't matter. They spend attention on information that doesn't help them make better decisions. This waste isn't just inefficient. It's destructive because it reduces the resources available for activities that could actually improve their lives. Franklin's approach to frugality was based on constantly asking whether each expenditure of resources would create genuine value. Not just immediate pleasure or temporary convenience, but lasting improvement in capability, relationships, or contribution to others. This standard eliminated most wasteful spending while ensuring that resources were available for investments that would compound over time. Together, resolution, industry, and frugality create what Franklin called moral momentum. The ability to sustain effective action over long periods regardless of changing circumstances. When you can make reliable commitments, execute them consistently, and manage resources wisely, you become someone who can be counted on to produce results. This reliability creates trust with others and confidence in yourself. It allows you to take on larger projects and make longer-term commitments because you know you can follow through. It attracts opportunities because people prefer to work with individuals who deliver what they promise. But perhaps, most importantly, these three virtues working together create a compound effect where small, consistent actions accumulate into extraordinary results over time. Most people underestimate what they can accomplish through sustained effort because they've never maintained sustained effort long enough to see the compound benefits. They start projects enthusiastically, but abandon them before they reach the point where results accelerate. They make commitments sincerely, but break them before they experience the power of consistent follow-through. They invest resources wisely for short periods, but return to wasteful habits before they see the long-term benefits of frugality. Franklin maintained these three virtues for decades, and the compound effect was extraordinary. He built successful businesses, made scientific discoveries, helped found a nation, and developed expertise in multiple fields. None of these achievements came from dramatic breakthroughs or special talents. They came from the systematic application of resolution, industry, and frugality over many years. This is the power of integrated virtue development. It makes things possible that no amount of talent or luck can achieve. The key to developing these virtues is starting small and building gradually. Don't try to revolutionize your entire life overnight. Choose one small area where you can practice making clear resolutions, executing them consistently, and managing resources wisely. Develop reliability in that one area until it becomes natural, then expand to other areas. This gradual approach builds genuine capability rather than temporary enthusiasm. It creates lasting change rather than dramatic starts that fade quickly. Most importantly, it proves to yourself that you can develop the character traits needed for significant achievement, which creates the confidence needed to pursue larger goals and make greater contributions. Part 12. The final integration, living the complete philosophy. Sincerity. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly, and if you speak, speak accordingly. Justice. Wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Moderation. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. These 7th, 8th, and 9th virtues address what might be the greatest source of human relationship problems and social ineffectiveness. Most people give away their social power through dishonesty, unfairness, or extremism without even realizing it. They allow immediate emotions to determine their social behavior. They become reactive when others disappoint them and aggressive when others disagree with them. They say things they don't mean and make commitments they don't keep. This social inconsistency makes them unreliable partners, unpredictable colleagues, and ineffective leaders. Franklin understood that true social power comes from maintaining these three virtues regardless of external social circumstances. Sincerity means aligning your words with your actual thoughts and your actions with your stated values. Most people treat honesty as a luxury they can afford only when it's convenient or safe. They say what others want to hear rather than what they actually think. They make commitments they hope they'll be able to keep rather than commitments they know they can keep. They present themselves as having qualities they wish they had rather than accurately representing their current capabilities. This social dishonesty might seem to provide short-term advantages, but it always creates long-term problems. People eventually notice the gaps between your words and your actions. They lose trust in your commitments and confidence in your character. Most importantly, you lose connection with your own authentic self because you've spent so much energy managing false impressions. Sincerity isn't about saying everything you think or sharing every detail of your internal experience. It's about ensuring that what you do say and what you do commit to accurately reflects your actual thoughts and capabilities. This creates a reliability and authenticity that is immediately recognizable to others. People trust someone who practices sincerity because they know that person's words and actions come from a genuine place rather than from social manipulation or self-deception. Justice builds on this foundation of sincerity by extending it to how you treat others. Justice means giving others what they deserve based on their actions and circumstances, not based on your emotional reactions or personal preferences. Most people are just when it's easy and unjust when they're upset, stressed, or tempted by personal advantage. They treat people well when those people can help them, and poorly when those people can't. They keep their word when it's convenient and break it when it becomes costly. This inconsistent approach to justice destroys relationships and undermines long-term effectiveness. Franklin understood that justice requires treating others fairly regardless of your current emotional state or immediate self-interest. This doesn't mean being naive about others' intentions or failing to protect your own legitimate interests. It means consistently applying the same standards of fairness that you would want others to apply to you. When you wrong others through action or neglect, you create enemies and lose opportunities for cooperation. When you consistently treat others justly, you build a reputation for fairness that attracts high-quality relationships and collaborative opportunities. Moderation completes this social foundation by providing the emotional regulation needed to maintain sincerity and justice under pressure. Moderation means avoiding extremes in your reactions to both positive and negative experiences. When something good happens, you appreciate it without becoming overconfident or careless. When something bad happens, you address it without becoming overwhelmed or vindictive. When others treat you well, you respond appropriately without becoming dependent or entitled. When others treat you poorly, you protect yourself without becoming bitter or aggressive. This emotional equilibrium allows you to maintain good judgment and effective action regardless of external circumstances. Most people lose their effectiveness when emotions run high. They make poor decisions when they're excited, and even worse decisions when they're angry or hurt. They say things they regret when they're emotional, and do things they later wish they could undo. Franklin understood that this emotional reactivity undermines everything else you're trying to achieve. You cannot maintain sincerity when you're emotionally reactive because you'll say things you don't really mean. You cannot maintain justice when you're angry because you'll treat others based on your emotions rather than their actual behavior. Moderation provides the emotional stability needed to practice the other virtues consistently. Together, sincerity, justice, and moderation create what Franklin called social reliability, the ability to maintain good relationships and effective collaboration regardless of changing circumstances or emotional challenges. When people know they can count on you to be honest, fair, and moderate, they trust you with important opportunities and valuable relationships. When you consistently practice these virtues, you become someone others want to work with, learn from, and support. This social capital compounds over time, creating access to resources, information, and opportunities that are not available to people who are socially unreliable. But perhaps most importantly, these virtues working together create inner peace and self-respect that no external achievement can provide. When you know you're consistently honest, fair, and moderate, you can face any social situation with confidence. You're not carrying the burden of maintaining false impressions or the anxiety of hoping others don't discover your inconsistencies. You're not constantly managing the consequences of unfair treatment of others or extreme reactions to circumstances. This freedom from social anxiety and guilt creates enormous energy for creative and productive activity. Part 13, the final virtues, mastery and wisdom. Cleanliness. Tolerate no uncleanliness in body, clothes, or habitation. Tranquility. Be not disturbed at trifles, or at accidents common or unavoidable. Chastity. Rarely use venery, but for health or offspring. Never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. Humility. Imitate Jesus and Socrates. These final four virtues represent the completion of Franklin's system for human development. They address the highest levels of personal mastery and wisdom that most people never attempt to develop. Cleanliness might seem like the most basic virtue, but Franklin understood that it represents something much deeper than hygiene. Cleanliness is about maintaining standards in areas where no one else will hold you accountable. It's about caring for yourself and your environment, even when it requires effort, and no one will notice or reward you for it. It's about developing the discipline to maintain quality in small things as preparation for maintaining quality in large things. Most people maintain cleanliness only when external pressure requires it. They clean up when guests are coming or when they'll be judged for messiness. They dress well when they need to make an impression, but neglect their appearance when they're alone. They organize their space when it becomes absolutely necessary, but ignore disorder when they think they can get away with it. This conditional approach to cleanliness reveals a deeper character issue: the inability to maintain standards without external enforcement. Franklin understood that people who cannot maintain cleanliness for their own benefit will struggle to maintain any high standard when external pressure is absent. Cleanliness becomes a practice ground for developing the self-discipline needed for excellence in any area. When you maintain cleanliness consistently, you develop the habit of caring about quality even when it's inconvenient. You develop pride in your standards even when no one else notices them. You develop the ability to maintain excellence as a personal practice rather than just a social performance. Tranquility builds on this foundation by developing emotional cleanliness, the ability to maintain inner calm regardless of external circumstances. Most people allow their emotional state to be determined by whatever happens around them. They become upset when small things go wrong, stressed when they face common problems, and overwhelmed when they encounter normal difficulties. This emotional reactivity wastes enormous amounts of energy and prevents clear thinking when calm analysis is most needed. Franklin's concept of tranquility isn't about being emotionless or passive. It's about developing the emotional stability needed to respond to situations based on their actual importance rather than your immediate emotional reaction. This means remaining calm when facing minor inconveniences that don't actually threaten anything important. It means maintaining perspective when dealing with common problems that everyone faces regularly. It means staying focused on solutions when encountering unavoidable difficulties that cannot be changed through emotional reaction. Tranquility allows you to save your emotional energy for situations that actually deserve emotional investment. When you're not constantly upset about trivial matters, you have more emotional resources available for dealing with genuinely important challenges. When you maintain emotional stability during routine difficulties, you're better prepared to handle truly serious problems when they arise. This emotional conservation creates a kind of strength and resilience that reactive people never develop. Chastity addresses one of the most powerful forces in human life: sexual energy and romantic attachment. Franklin's approach to chastity isn't about eliminating sexual expression, but about ensuring that sexual behavior serves your overall development rather than undermining it. Most people approach sexuality reactively, pursuing sexual satisfaction whenever they feel the impulse without considering the broader consequences for their energy, relationships, or long-term goals. This approach often leads to complications that distract from other important activities. Franklin understood that sexual energy is a powerful force that can either support or undermine everything else you're trying to achieve. When channeled wisely, it provides motivation, creativity, and connection. When indulged carelessly, it creates drama, weakness, and distraction. Chastity means making conscious choices about sexual expression based on what will serve your health, relationships, and overall development, rather than just following impulses without consideration. This doesn't mean suppressing natural desires, but directing them in ways that enhance rather than diminish your life. Humility completes Franklin's virtue system by providing the foundation for continued learning and growth. Humility means recognizing that no matter how much you've learned or achieved, you still have more to discover and more ways to improve. It means remaining open to feedback, criticism, and new perspectives even when you've developed expertise in your areas of focus. It means treating others with respect, regardless of their current level of knowledge or achievement, because you understand that everyone has something to teach you. Most people become less humble as they become more successful. They start believing their own publicity and become closed to input that challenges their established methods or beliefs. This intellectual arrogance stops their growth and eventually leads to stagnation or decline. Franklin understood that humility is not about low self-esteem or diminishing your achievements. It's about maintaining the learning attitude that makes continued development possible. The examples he chose, Jesus and Socrates, represent two different approaches to humility. Jesus represents humility through service, putting others' needs before your own ego, and finding meaning through contribution rather than personal glory. Socrates represents humility through inquiry, acknowledging the limits of your knowledge and maintaining curiosity about what you don't yet understand. Together, these examples show that humility can be active and engaging rather than passive and self-diminishing. When you combine service orientation with intellectual curiosity, you create a foundation for lifelong learning and increasing contribution to others. Together, these final four virtues create what Franklin called personal mastery, the ability to maintain high standards in all areas of life, regardless of external circumstances or internal resistance. When you practice cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility consistently, you develop a level of self-command that makes you virtually unstoppable. You're not distracted by mess or disorder because you maintain cleanliness automatically. You're not derailed by emotional reactions because you've developed tranquility. You're not weakened by sexual drama because you practice appropriate chastity. You're not limited by arrogance because you maintain humility. This combination of virtues creates extraordinary freedom to focus on what matters most and pursue your highest potential without the internal obstacles that stop most people. Part 14. The Method of Implementation. Franklin's virtue development wasn't theoretical, but intensely practical. He created a specific system for building these character traits that anyone can use. His method demonstrates that character development, like any other skill, requires systematic practice rather than just good intentions. Franklin made a small book with 13 pages, one for each virtue. Each page had 7 columns for the days of the week and 13 rows for the virtues. Every day, he would focus specifically on one virtue while monitoring his behavior in all 13 areas. He would mark a dot every time he failed to live up to any virtue, with the goal of having clean pages with no dots. This simple tracking system created awareness, accountability, and motivation for consistent improvement. The genius of Franklin's system was its focus and specificity. Instead of trying to improve everything at once, he focused intensively on one virtue at a time for a full week. This allowed him to develop real competence in that virtue before moving to the next one. Instead of relying on vague intentions to be better, he had specific behavioral definitions for each virtue that allowed him to evaluate his performance objectively. Instead of depending on motivation or inspiration, he had a systematic process that worked regardless of how he felt on any given day. This systematic approach produced results that random effort could never achieve. By focusing on one virtue at a time, Franklin developed genuine competence in each area. By tracking his behavior daily, he created awareness that prevented unconscious backsliding. By cycling through all 13 virtues repeatedly, he maintained attention to his complete character development rather than neglecting some areas while developing others. The method also created momentum through visible progress. When Franklin could see his daily dots decreasing over time, he gained confidence in his ability to change his character through systematic effort. This confidence motivated continued effort even when progress seemed slow. The visible evidence of improvement provided satisfaction that made the effort feel worthwhile, even before the benefits became apparent in other areas of his life. But perhaps most importantly, Franklin's method taught him that character development is a skill that can be learned like any other skill. It's not a matter of having good genes or fortunate circumstances. It's a matter of understanding the principles of character change and applying them consistently over time. This understanding transformed Franklin's relationship with personal development from hoping he would naturally become better to knowing he could systematically make himself better through deliberate practice. Franklin continued using variations of this system throughout his life. Even after he had developed strong habits in all 13 virtues, he would return to focused practice whenever he noticed himself slipping in any area. He understood that character maintenance requires ongoing attention, just like physical fitness requires ongoing exercise. You cannot develop virtue once and then maintain it automatically. You must continue practicing the behaviors that create and sustain good character throughout your life. The tracking system also helped Franklin understand the connections between different virtues. He noticed that improvement in one area often supported improvement in other areas. Developing temperance made it easier to practice industry. Practicing sincerity supported the development of justice. Building order enhanced his ability to maintain resolution. These insights helped him see virtue development as an integrated system rather than just a collection of separate behaviors. Modern applications of Franklin's method have proven its effectiveness across different cultures and time periods. The principles underlying his approach, focus, specificity, tracking, and systematic practice, work for developing any positive behavior or eliminating any negative habit. The key is adapting the specific virtues and definitions to your current situation and goals while maintaining the systematic structure that makes change possible. Part 15. The Complete Legacy, Living Beyond Technique. In the virtue, there is excellence and no failure. Wisdom has substance, principle has power, the way has direction, spirit is service. These final insights from Franklin's complete philosophy point toward the ultimate destination of all character development and the deepest purpose of human existence. Virtue is not perfection in the sense of never making mistakes, but completeness beyond the need for constant self-monitoring. It's the state where your character has become so integrated that it operates without conscious effort. You no longer need to think about whether to be honest, because honesty has become your natural expression. You no longer struggle with whether to work hard, because industry has become your automatic response to opportunities and challenges. This is the state where character transcends itself and becomes natural living, where virtue becomes wisdom, where practice becomes contribution. It's what every serious person seeks, whether they realize it or not. It's the state where you're no longer trying to develop character but expressing it. Most people never reach this integration because they remain attached to their moral efforts, their self-improvement projects, and their character development methods. They collect more and more techniques, attend more and more seminars, and read more and more books about personal development. But they never let go of the scaffolding that helped them build their character. They remain dependent on conscious effort, explicit rules, and predetermined strategies for maintaining good behavior. This dependency limits their authenticity because conscious self-control is too effortful for natural expression. It also limits their contribution because predetermined character strategies cannot address novel moral situations that require creative ethical responses. Virtue requires abandoning this dependency and trusting that your character development has created something deeper than conscious technique. This letting go is challenging for most people because it means releasing the sense of control that has guided their self-improvement efforts. But virtue is not a rejection of character development. It's the fulfillment of character development. You cannot reach virtue by skipping the stages of conscious practice and systematic improvement. These stages are necessary foundations that make virtue possible. But at some point, the foundations must become invisible so that what they support can operate freely. A master craftsman doesn't think about hand positions or tool techniques while creating something beautiful. That knowledge is still there operating automatically, but it doesn't intrude on the creative expression. That's the real purpose of the work. The technique has become transparent, allowing something deeper to emerge. This is what Franklin meant when he said that spirit is service. Not that spirit doesn't exist, but that it cannot be grasped or controlled directly. It emerges only when everything else is in place and then allowed to operate freely. It's the space between moral rules, the pause between choices, the moment between intention and action. Living from virtue means making decisions and taking actions that arise from your integrated character, rather than from conscious moral calculation or social pressure. Your responses become perfectly appropriate to each situation because they emerge from wisdom rather than technique. You don't follow rules, but embody principles. You don't apply methods, but express understanding. You don't pursue goals, but serve purposes. This shift from trying to being transforms everything about how you engage with life. Instead of trying to control your character, you focus on expressing the character you've developed. Instead of manipulating circumstances to test your virtue, you align yourself with the opportunities that allow your character to contribute. Instead of imposing your moral will on situations, you discover what each situation calls for and provide that. This approach is more effective than force and more satisfying than control. Virtue also represents freedom from the need for external moral validation or recognition. When you're operating from integrated character, your actions arise from internal compass rather than external expectations. You do what needs to be done because your character tells you it needs to be done, not because others expect it or reward it. This creates an integrity and authenticity that's immediately recognizable to others. People trust someone who operates from virtue because they sense that this person's actions are guided by something deeper than self-interest or social pressure. They may not understand what guides the person, but they can feel that it's reliable and beneficial. This trust is the foundation of all real influence in leadership. It cannot be manufactured or manipulated, but only earned through consistent demonstration of character in action. But perhaps the most important aspect of virtue is that it allows you to serve something larger than yourself without losing yourself in that service. When you operate from virtue, your personal development and contribution to others become aligned. What serves your character development also serves others. What expresses your highest understanding also contributes to the common good. What fulfills your unique potential also adds something valuable to the world. This alignment eliminates the conflict between self-improvement and service that troubles so many people. You can pursue your own character development while simultaneously contributing to others' welfare. This integration of personal and universal purposes is what makes life meaningful at the deepest level. Virtue is also where innovation and moral creativity emerge. When you're not bound by predetermined moral rules or established ethical methods, you can respond to each situation with fresh wisdom and original solutions. Your accumulated character development becomes raw material for new combinations and applications rather than rigid constraints on what's morally possible. You can see ethical opportunities that people trapped in conventional moral thinking cannot see. You can create connections between disparate moral principles that others consider unrelated. You can find solutions that others consider impossible because you're not limited by their assumptions about what virtue requires. This creative capacity is what allows some people to make breakthrough contributions to moral progress, while others remain stuck in conventional approaches. The difference isn't intelligence or knowledge, but freedom from attachment to existing moral frameworks. Reaching virtue requires a paradoxical combination of intense effort and complete surrender. You must practice systematically and develop consistently to build the foundation that makes virtue possible. But you must also be willing to let go of attachment to the results of that practice. You must work hard to develop your character while remaining unattached to your identity as someone who has good character. You must care deeply about your moral development while remaining unconcerned about recognition for that development. You must commit fully to character improvement while accepting that the ultimate goal is to transcend the need for conscious character management. This paradox cannot be resolved intellectually, but only lived experientially. It's the final test of whether you're truly ready to embody what you've developed, or whether you remain attached to the process of development itself. Virtue is not a destination you reach and then remain at permanently. It's a capacity you develop and can access when circumstances require it. There will still be times when you need to rely on conscious character techniques, systematic moral analysis, and deliberate ethical planning. Virtue doesn't replace these capabilities, but provides an additional option when they're insufficient. It's the resource you can draw upon when facing situations that are too complex, too novel, or too rapidly changing for conventional moral approaches. It's also the state you can enter when you want to contribute at your absolute best, whether in relationships, work, or service. Having access to virtue transforms you into someone who can handle any ethical challenge and contribute to any moral situation. It makes you useful to others and fulfilling to yourself. It's the culmination of Franklin's complete philosophy and the ultimate achievement of human character development. It's available to anyone willing to pay the price of complete commitment to systematic virtue development.